COVID changed everything. The green light for the rollout of all the absurdity in the world. Stockpiled absurdity was pushed like knockoff watches and handbags out the backs of lorries. Healthy people shut in their homes. People arrested for walking alone in the mountains or running along beaches. Heaven forbid they might stay fit and boost their vitamin D. Elderly people on end-of-life care, midazolam and morphine instead of getting treatment for illness. Gyms closed but fast food outlets open round the clock, the better to replace muscle with fat. Illness instead of health. Chains on swings in play parks, hazard tape on park benches, magic arrows on the floors of supermarkets, fear stoked that COVID couldn't get you if you were sat down in a restaurant, but that it might kill you if you walked to the toilet without a strip of blue paper over your mouth and nose. Scientists have sown more fear porn by claiming COVID is the new HIV. And who was up to his elbows in experiments concerning both? Oh yes, Anthony Fauci, former boss of the US Centre for Disease Control. Nothing to see here. Now the leader of Slovakia, Robert Fico, has vowed to investigate what happened to his people in that time of the biggest financial deal in European Commission history, being the order for vast quantities of the so-called vaccines, and to ask why so many people were urged to take products of unproven efficacy. Here at home, our own COVID inquiry won't even consider the matter of the so-called vaccines until after the next election, if ever. And then the absurdity of said PM Sunak standing up in Parliament last week to declare unequivocally that COVID vaccines are safe. More and more the absurdity is obvious, like the grin on the Cheshire cat that won't go away. In Canada, a federal judge ruled last week that Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's use of the Emergencies Act to crush the Freedom Convoy protests by the country's truckers was unreasonable and violated charter rights. Undaunted and unashamed, Trudeau's government is appealing the decision. Canadian author Regina Watteau has published a new book, Fissman's Fraud, detailing the crime committed against the Canadian people when what she calls hate science, exploiting imaginary data and excluding real-world data, was used to invert reality and to demonise and destroy those who chose not to receive the experimental gene therapies. She details how mainstream media and academic institutions conspired to make impossible the lives of those disinclined to risk the shots, and so emboldened the Canadian government to freeze the bank accounts of those taking part in or supporting the truckers' protests, even to throw them in jail. The truth is out there, and yet those responsible remain in place, moving on to the next absurdity. It won't be long before the guilty exonerate themselves of all blame by declaring none of it actually happened. I kid you not. Canada is the country in which a real-life Nazi was, just last year, treated to a standing ovation in that country's parliament, applauded by Justin Trudeau and the rest of the parliamentarians for his efforts to fight the Russians, our allies, without whom Nazism would have conquered the world. Beyond absurd, utterly shameful, and yet consequences for Trudeau were there none. Around the jabbed countries of the world, excess deaths are, to put it mildly, alarming. Alarming to anyone with their eyes open, that is. Others injured by the injectables are ignored, ridiculed, living lives in limbo after having been persuaded they were doing the right thing or downright coerced on pain of losing jobs. Government statistics here in Britain, in the United States, across Europe, in Asia, show people of all ages dying unexpectedly in large numbers. Heart attacks are up by 20% in the middle-aged. Fatal heart attacks in people not previously known to have been suffering ill health. Excess deaths for the young are higher too. Mortuaries are overflowing, making room for extra corpses, funeral directors struggling to cope. And yet, despite the efforts of lone voices like that of Andrew Bridgen MP, doggedly asking questions about causes and seeking compassionate debate by his parliamentary colleagues, all but a handful steadfastly refuses to talk about why thousands of their constituents are dropping dead, and not of COVID. Is that behaviour by so many elected representatives just absurd? Or are we witnessing a silent, unquestioned atrocity?